These people, and I will say these people, these Trumpers who have spent their entire life attacking people for being insufficiently patriotic, and then they lose, and they just hate America. They hate America. They're constantly going around saying how weak we are. They hate our military. They say how weak our military is when it's the strongest in the world. They hate our economy. They claim the president of the United States is a socialist. The Dow yesterday made all of these people a lot richer, breaking 40,000 for the first time, despite Donald Trump's lies that it would collapse if Joe Biden was president of the United States. They hate this country. They attack this country. The only time they love it is when their person is in office. And I've just got to say, and we've got a lot of legal, brilliant minds around this table, so they can speak to this later.
And I will play more from Joe Scarborough there. Nicely, it's stark terms, but describing in the way that they deserve to be described given their actions, the current MAGA movement and many of these leaders. And I'll get into that more. But first, let me give you the context of what he's talking about. There was a bombshell New York Times report about Justice Samuel Alito and his actions shortly after January 6th. It's titled, "At Justice Alito's House, a Stop the Steal symbol on display. An upside-down flag adopted by Trump supporters contesting the Biden victory flew over the justice's front lawn as the Supreme Court was considering an election case." And for our video viewers, you can see what that looked like. And the article goes on, after the 2020 presidential election, as some Trump supporters falsely claimed that President Biden had stolen the office, many of them displayed a startling symbol outside their homes, on their cars, and in online posts, an upside-down American flag. One of the homes flying an inverted flag during that time was the residence of Supreme Court Justice Samuel A. Alito Jr. in Alexandria, Virginia, according to photographs and interviews with neighbors. And then you have this: while the flag was up, the court was contending with whether to hear a 2020 election case, with Justice Alito on the losing end of that decision. So the wrong side of that argument that they should take up this 2020 election case, Justice Alito was on the side of. Oh, and it just so happens after January 6th, after we already saw the damage that was being done by these lies, he had an inverted flag, an upside down flag that apparently was being used at that time to represent opposition to the lawful Democratic election of President Joe Biden in favor of the Stop the Steal movement. Now, we'll get to the excuse from Justice Alito as to why that was happening, some argument, it was my wife who did it, but really disturbing stuff. Here's more from Joe Scarborough.
We've got a lot of legal, brilliant minds around this table. So they can speak to this later if they want to. I will tell you, growing up,
I'm going to pause your viewing of this video super quickly to ask you to subscribe to the YouTube channel. Just click that subscribe button, and right next to it is the join button, so you can become a member to get the daily bonus show by clicking that join button. Back to the video.
One of my friends' fathers was a federal judge. I had no idea until I got older whether he was Republican or Democrat. And that was the case in Northwest Florida, a very conservative place. The federal judges kept themselves beyond reproach. They never talked politics, ever, in the privacy of their homes. If you asked them opinion, they would just say, "Not my job," right? "I'm a judge." They actually took their oath seriously.
Yeah, so he's speaking to the story about Justice Alito in particular, but also, like I said earlier, with the description of MAGA, to some people would seem a little overboard, but some of these leaders, I think it needs to be said, your actions are representing someone who hates what America stands for. That's what we're seeing from a lot of these individuals. And I'll remind people, if that does sound too sharp, too aggressive, that the outcome of your actions can exemplify a truth about you that you don't necessarily feel viscerally. And what I mean is, you cannot feel like you hate America, but be doing things that represent someone who does, right? We see this with racism too. A lot of times people who will be accused of being racist or acting in a racist way will think, well, that's absurd because I can go into my own brain and my own heart and think, I'm not racist. But then the important clarification is just remember, it's your actions that can exemplify racism, right? Even if you don't find yourself walking around thinking that you're hating a certain race. And a similar thing here where you might not think you hate the values that America stands for, but if you did some introspection, you might realize that's what your actions are representing, someone who does. By throwing out any dedication to the legitimacy of our democratic process, right whenever the person that you really wanted to win loses. Then you never had that principle in the first place. And that's what even apparently a Supreme Court justice was feeling and thinking and representing that by putting an upside down flag in front of their house. Now, that's the other really important thing that Joe Scarborough called out, which is how long have we heard from these Republicans that not only are they the most patriotic ones, and that's sort of a part of their identity, but also because of that justifies them accusing Democrats of being America haters. And anytime that a concern about situation in America currently, or a criticism of or pointing out of where we've gone wrong in the past, so often the response from some of these individuals would be, you're just not patriotic, you hate America. But now we're in a place where Trump at his rallies refers to the United States as, his terminology, not mine, a third world country, and calls it a failed nation, and we've gone to hell, and we're the laughing stock of the world. And then Joe Scarborough cited some other examples there. And then most fundamentally, what do we have as a country if not our democratic process, this democratic republic that everything is built on, and that is being actively attacked? And so then to add to that picture of these right-wing ideologues in all sorts of positions, in the media that sacrifice facts for their ideology, in Congress who do the same, and now to add to that the fact that a Supreme Court justice alongside Clarence Thomas is doing this, is engaging in these sorts of actions after January 6th. Now, to be fair to him, he said, my wife did that, and it happened because she got in an argument with a neighbor about politics. And granted, the story goes from Alito, I'm not inclined to believe much of what he says now, but let's just take him at face value, was that his wife was called horrible things by this neighbor. Words that I wouldn't repeat on the show. And that would be absolutely condemnable if it happened. And also, I don't see how an argument between his wife and a neighbor makes sense to put an upside down flag saying that you oppose the lawful, legitimate certification of Joe Biden's win. Here's Rachel Maddow responding to this too.
It's unsettling. It's gross. First of all, everybody has different marriage rules, but it's my wife's fault is probably never within the marriage rules when you are talking to the New York Times about something that you've done that has brought enough scandal upon you and the institution you represent that it's on the front page of the New York Times. It was my wife. I just don't, even if it was, I don't know. I don't want to give you any advice. But I feel like, the upside down flag, it wasn't like he had a Trump 2024, Trump 2028 flag up there. It was the American flag upside down, which is a traditional symbol of distress. Unless Mrs. Alito, I guess, was signaling her distress and calling for help. The explanation makes no sense. That was something that people were doing around that time to indicate that the country was effectively under siege in some way, which is what Trump supporters were making the case for when they were describing the election as having been stolen when it wasn't. Justice Alito has become increasingly unembarrassed about displaying himself as a partisan, as a consumer of partisan.
Yeah. And so now we have, just to remember, that we have one Supreme Court justice whose wife during this same period of time, Ginny Thomas, who he described as his best friend, so presumably they were talking about this, his wife was actively reaching out to and imploring Trump administration officials to overthrow a Democratic election. And she believed that Democrats were in, barges off of Gitmo and were being punished for their crimes against the country. And that's one in Clarence Thomas's other wild views, separate from his association with his wife. Then we have Justice Alito, who was doing this, or was allowing, he saw it, it's right in front of his house, was allowing this symbol to be shown outside of his home. And then he's blaming his wife for it, which is just as low character as it gets. And this is an example of, we talked about in the aftermath of the overturning of Roe v. Wade, what's happening is facts and so let me backtrack. We've talked about in the media how facts are being sacrificed in service of ideology. And it happens across the political spectrum, but it's especially bad, and you can't quite compare to how bad it is in the MAGA media bubble, right? Choosing ideology and your political motives over being accurate in a factual way. We're also seeing dedication to institutions being put below on the list of priorities, ideology and political ambitions. And that's when that is brought to its furthest extreme, you see Trump trying to overturn the election. That also is happening with the Supreme Court, where they're overturning Roe v. Wade, sacrificing this 50-year precedent, and also here, Justice Alito showing his support for a really dangerous anti-democratic movement. And that represents him knowing, if this ever got out, that this would deteriorate the belief in the legitimacy of the Supreme Court. And so within the Supreme Court, all these actions are being taken by the especially hardcore right-wing justices that disparage and damage the legitimacy of that really important, one of the most important institutions. And that is really sad and frightening. I'll leave it there. Lots to respond to there, so let me know in the comments.